Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. The war in Afghanistan continues with no one in sight, and still the security situation in Afghanistan is fragile, it's precarious. Afghanistan is still the most dangerous place perhaps on earth. Yesterday, in an attack, the provincial chief of police, Kandahar provincial chief of police lost his life. The governor of Kandahar also lost his life in an attack with several other officials of Afghanistan. And this was a big attack, a big blow to the Kabul government, to the provincial, primarily Kandahar provincial government. This attack was claimed by the Taliban, and interestingly, General Miller, the head of US forces in Afghanistan, was also in this meeting. While they left the meeting and they were heading towards their helicopters, a gunman who was supposedly the gunman of the governor attacked the officials, in which, as I said earlier, General Razik of the police chief of Kandahar, intelligence chief of Kandahar, and the governor lost their lives. General Miller escaped the attack. This is a big blow, as I said earlier, to the Kabul government, and also this is important because Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, is pushing Taliban for the peace talks with the United States, and Taliban still are reportedly reluctant. Some factions are, some factions aren't. What is going to be the future of the peace talks between the Taliban and the United States, and also keeping in mind that the parliamentary elections are underway in Afghanistan? They are suspended for a week in Kandahar, but they might resume after a week, and we have to see how things would unfold in the next 10 days. Today we are going to discuss about the security situation in Afghanistan, the future of peace talks with the Taliban. Pakistan has condemned the attack, and Pakistan has said that Pakistan supports the people of Afghanistan in any process, political process, that involves the people of Afghanistan, a process which is led by and owned by the Afghan people. To discuss this, we have our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Lieutenant General retired Naeem Lodhi, a renowned senior defense analyst and former Minister of Defense. Welcome to the show. Our second guest is Mr. Hassan Akbar. He's an expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and director of Jinnah Institute, a policy think tank based in Islamabad. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hassan. General Lodhi, starting with what happened yesterday, certainly this is not the first time. The governor house in Kandahar was attacked earlier as well, last year. But this time, General Razik primarily was the main target, and Taliban have claimed that General Miller and Razik both were the targets. This attack, how do you see it? This undermines the security situation over there?
Definitely. I think it's a sad event, and irrespective that what relations we have with the individuals across the border, any violence, and terrorism is not acceptable, and we have also condemned it. Pakistani government has also condemned it. But it has to be seen in the context of the elections, the talks between Taliban and the US, and also the way the Afghan government was initially being kept separated from these talks and all that. So I think in a fragmented country like Afghanistan, and if we look at the percentage of area which is under control of the government and under control of other entities, carrying out election, in my opinion, is not a very good idea. I don't know. We cannot interfere in the, other affairs, but it seems the way it is, the 60-70% is not under the control of the government. I am not saying that it is entirely under the control of Taliban. The other factions also, they are controlling it. So how do you carry out genuine elections? How do the people, without fear, they can come out and vote for the people? That is one. And secondly, as we were discussing earlier, that once it was agreed between the US and Afghan Taliban that now they will talk. So initially we were all very hopeful, and we were hoping a good situation. But then I think something went wrong, and what I could see was that Taliban were still insisting that, okay, we are not saying that you first leave and then we'll talk, but we will talk about your leaving schedule. Schedule. So I think that again became an impasse situation. And then the sitting Afghan government was very unhappy initially once Khalilzad wanted to talk to Taliban without their, informing them, and then later on they found it and all that. So there's a lot of things going on, circles within circles. So one cannot really pinpoint that what was the real motive of this this attack. Was it the elections or the talks or whatever?
Right.
So I think we'll have to wait for some time before we really find out that what is going on.
What's going on? Hassan, different presidents, Afghan presidents have been skeptic about US approach towards Taliban and how they approach Taliban for the peace talks. President Ghani is also skeptic. He is not very happy with Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, the way he's approaching the Taliban, bypassing, let's say, the Kabul government. Is President Ghani the new Karzai?
Well, I think it's premature to say that. I think Ashraf Ghani, at least at the start of his tenure, made overtures to Pakistan and for peace, outlining a program that was Afghan-centric and Afghan-owned, and did not indulge in the kind of rhetoric that President Karzai had involved himself in. But over the years, we see that despite President Ashraf Ghani's personal political involvement in peace and interest in peace, whether we see it through the ceasefire, the Eid ceasefire, and his unilateral announcement for holding peace talks with the Taliban, he feels certainly that it has not been reciprocated for various reasons. And I think General Saab very rightly pointed out that Afghanistan is such a complicated grey area that it is very difficult to assign motive and causation to the various events that are happening in Afghanistan right now. And for various reasons, Ashraf Ghani's overtures were not responded to, which is why he has taken a more hawkish position. Also because he feels that his own political standing as the presidential elections come up has deteriorated and weakened. The National Unity Government itself created internal pressures for Ashraf Ghani to deal with. He's had to face resignations from many security service, senior members of the security services in his cabinet. Hekmat Karzai has recently also resigned. So, you know, it's a government that is also on a very weak footing in Afghanistan till the next presidential election.
It's also kind of deja vu for a lot of people who have been observing Afghanistan, because I think more or less the story was with Hamid Karzai, the former president, and after he left the office, he was very critical of US involvement and the US methods in Afghanistan. Jansab, talking about this whole thing, the thing that is going on in Afghanistan, President Ashraf Ghani was denied that legitimacy because what he was looking for a few months back, when they wanted direct talks with the Taliban actually deny any legitimacy to the Kabul government. They don't even consider them a party in this whole war. It is basically the Taliban versus the United States and the NATO forces. Do you think that now the Kabul government is primarily trying to gain that legitimacy and they are expecting that from US? And can US give them that legitimacy?
Okay, you also talked earlier about any similarity between Ashraf Ghani and Karzai. Yeah. One similarity I can point out, and that is both of them couldn't have stayed in power without Americans. So this one basic difference that Afghan Taliban are asking for a schedule of their withdrawal, and this party knows that they can't survive without Americans. So there's a basic conflict. The type of peace they want and the type of peace they want is very different. And let me also say one or two words about Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. Once we say that we want a solution which should be Afghan-led and Afghan-owned, which is a very legitimate thing to say, but who's running Afghanistan today? Can Ashraf Ghani survive without the financial support of America?
And he made that clear in his interview.
He said himself.
With DW,
and we all who are students of political science, we understand that what is sovereignty. Sovereignty is if you can make a law and if you can implement that law within the boundaries of that country. So I don't know. Naturally, from the world perspective and from even the government point of view, the legitimate government, even today, from our point, is Ashraf Ghani's government. But actually, from pure political science, he is not legitimate. He cannot promulgate laws all over the country. He cannot enforce that law. He cannot run that country without the financial support of Americans. He cannot run that country without the intelligence support of Indians and Americans and even their military support. So we can keep saying this as a very legitimate sentence that Afghan owned and Afghan led. Americans from thousands of miles are there. Indians are, supporting that government. Probably it is only meant for our consumption, the Pakistani, that please, Afghan led and Afghan owned, you must stay away. So the whole world can put their fingers in Afghanistan except us. So that is a very strange logic. I don't understand, but anyway.
But President Ghani, Hassan, they have been trying to bring Taliban to the negotiation tables. They tried that. They also said that they would unconditionally go for the peace talks with the Taliban. If you remember, a few months back, they also wanted to give them visas, passports. They can to the Taliban so that they can live in Kabul. They can travel abroad, live legally, travel legally. But Taliban denied that. Perhaps Ashraf Ghani also went out of the way for the peace with the Taliban. Why was that peace denied to Ashraf Ghani? And do you think that we should give the credit to the Ghani government for what they have been doing for the peace in Afghanistan?
Well, I think I don't know if we can say we should give them the credit for peace or trying to achieve peace in Afghanistan, but we can surely give them credit for making an effort. Whether they were sincere in that effort is yet to be seen because it was not reciprocated. The other thing that I think we need to highlight is that what incentives did they give to the Taliban to come onto the negotiating table? Let's not forget the ground realities of Afghanistan, which are not reported by mainstream press, which is, as General Saab pointed out, that large swaths of rural Afghanistan are uncontested with the Taliban. That whenever the Taliban have made advances on military bases in rural areas, whether it is in Ghazni, whether it is in Kunar and other provinces, the Taliban have very easily defeated the Afghan national security forces, who have usually tried run away from a fight in Afghanistan. So in that situation, how do you convince an armed insurgent group to negotiate with the government? I think that's one fundamental problem. The second fundamental problem is that from the Taliban's point of view, the Kabul government is illegitimate. I mean, we in Pakistan considered it the legitimate government in Afghanistan. People voted for it. But the Taliban consider it an illegitimate government. And their point has always been that we will negotiate with the occupying forces, which is the United States, which is now a process which has begun. As the US itself has understood that the reality of the Taliban is something that they have to negotiate with. Equally, I would like to emphasize that the reality of an urban, educated Afghanistan that is invested in democracy and is invested in education is a reality that the Taliban have to negotiate with. So it's a difficult middle path which all parties involved need to find. And we see some positive news from the visit of Khalilzad. He's not liked by many players in the region, including his views on Pakistan are well known. But I think a hard bargainer like Khalilzad, while one may not entirely trust him because of his views, personal views, but I think that if he is invested in achieving peace as a policy orientation, I think that is something that we can look forward to. Perhaps he may be the person who delivers peace.
And also perhaps he has been able to attract some Taliban factions for the peace talks. That is what is also being reported in the media as well. General Lodhi, talking about Taliban, this attack, do you think that Taliban like to negotiate from a position of strength? This attack, what does it say about their approach towards peace with the United States, let's say, or towards peace in general?
I think more than that, they would like to convey the message that they are not weak. Whether they are in a position of strength or not, that has yet to be seen. But Americans for some time thought probably that they have now come up to a level threshold where they can at least say that they are at parity or they are they have a little ascendancy. So they wanted to talk. So probably if we look at the events in the last month, Taliban are making hectic efforts to reinstate their earlier position that they are still in strength as far as controlling the area is concerned and as far as controlling the people are concerned. But it has to be seen. I think the problem is that everybody wants peace in Afghanistan. There's no doubt about it. The only difference is peace on what conditions. For example, Americans would like to have peace, but also would like to stay there. The government of Kabul would also like the same, a peace, but with Americans, being there. Taliban, they have said again and again, although they agreed that this time they will be talking to Americans. Earlier, this was a condition that we will only talk if the talk is on when they will be going.
Right.
So I think they have shown little flexibility, but that flexibility is again fizzling away. I don't really know that.
We have We have renowned Syrian journalist Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai on a phone call. He's an expert on Afghanistan affairs. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Mr. Rahimullah Yusufzai, welcome to the show. We are discussing Afghanistan and the security situation over there in Afghanistan. Yesterday's attack, which killed the governor, the intelligence chief, and the police chief. How do you see this attack and the security situation in Afghanistan?
The governor house in Kandahar has seen so many attacks. Even last year there was one big attack in which 5 UAE diplomats were killed along with the deputy governor and many other officials. It is again an inside job. It happened in the governor's compound. The U.S. military commander, General Scott Miller, survived, but 2 Americans were injured. And so many Afghan security officials have been killed. I think the security is becoming weak by the day. And there are so many infiltrators who are working for Taliban. There have been these insider attacks so many times. So it's a very hopeless situation, I must say. The Afghan government is becoming weaker instead of becoming stronger, as was the plan since the last 17 years. And now they're holding this election tomorrow. 1/3 of the polling stations will remain closed. So it will be a partial election. Let's see how much of the turnout. But the politicians have been very disappointing. The parliament has not delivered. That is also a reason, apart from the insecurity, that the Afghans are feeling very disappointed and frustrated with this kind of democracy.
How do you see the future of peace talks? Because Zalmay Khalilzad is having direct talks with the Taliban, at least that is what they claim. Do you think that on one point, perhaps US is also denying that legitimacy to the Kabul government, to the Ghani administration, because Ghani administration is not very happy with Zalmay Khalilzad, also the Taliban. Where does the Kabul government stand, and how do you see the future of peace talks?
In fact, this is not the first time that direct talks have been held between the US and the Taliban. There was one meeting in July. At that time, Alice Wells was leading the American delegation. This time it is Khalilzad. Before that, there were, contacts, and a meeting was also held in Dubai. So, the Americans actually, without accepting it, have legitimized the Taliban group. They have accepted, their demand to hold direct talks. They have realized that there can be no peace without Taliban being part of the solution. So the Americans are talking to Taliban. They're exploring the possibility of having further talks and eventually a peace agreement. I think the Americans have taken the Afghan government into confidence. That's why Khalilzad first went to Kabul, and then to Islamabad, and then to Qatar. So there is, I think, a broad agreement that the Americans should first directly deal with Taliban, hold talks, and maybe eventually Taliban will agree and talk to the Afghan government as well.
That Taliban would be ready to have, let's say, peace talks with US and the Kabul government. Do you see it that way?
No, I think initially, because the issue right now is the Taliban demand for withdrawal of all foreign forces in Afghanistan, and that can only be decided by the US as the most important power, in NATO, which has about.
But do you think that all the Taliban factions are demanding that, the withdrawal of US forces and the NATO forces?
Yes, that is actually unanimous demand. There's no disagreement. There's no disagreement among Taliban for talking with the Americans, because they believe that the Afghan government cannot decide when the foreign troops should leave. In fact, the Afghan government does not even want them to leave. So this issue can only be decided by the Americans. That's why Taliban are insisting on talking to the US But I think that they have shown some flexibility as far as we know. Taliban are now willing to have a timetable of withdrawal of U.S. forces. And they are saying that once the foreign forces leave, we can then talk to the Afghan government as well. So there has to be flexibility by all sides. Otherwise, these talks cannot make any headway.
Mr. Yusufzai, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Hassan, this is very interesting because what Mr. Yusufzai is saying that all the Taliban factions are on the same page when it comes to the withdrawal of US forces and the NATO forces, because at one point, experts in Islamabad and elsewhere were also thinking that perhaps few factions might also give some concession to US forces so that they might, control some parts and the rest of the parts would be with the Taliban and the Kabul government. This thing that all of them are on the same page, how do you see that?
Well, I have not seen any real proof of Taliban factions and them acting independently. I think there's a little bit of myth about this. I think the Taliban do have a decentralized way of conducting operations in Afghanistan, but that does not mean that their decisions or that their leadership is fractious. At least I don't seem to see any great, proof of that. So I do think that there is a unanimous agreement amongst the Taliban that they can talk to the Americans directly because they see Americans as the occupiers and themselves as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. That is their principled position. It has been for 17 years. They also now seem to be flexible on US presence in Afghanistan in some form. They also practically, I suppose, realize that Afghanistan cannot pay for itself and that without US support, financial support, any government in Afghanistan cannot exist for very long. So I think there is a path towards negotiation, but I'd just like to caution here that there are so many spoilers in this quagmire that is Afghanistan. For example, we have heard from people like Amrullah Saleh, who used to head the NDS, that we will start a resistance, we will start, we have heard that many old warlords that still continue to hold sway in Afghanistan, whether it is Dostum and others in the Northern Alliance, have started keeping weapons, repurchasing weapons for a day when they will have to fight out. And they will get support from other regional players who feel that their interests are being undermined by America and Pakistan through this peace deal with the Taliban. So even if we do end up having some kind of reconciliation with the large chunk of Taliban, let's not forget that it will not guarantee peace in Afghanistan.
That is interesting, and we are going to continue our discussion on Afghanistan and what would reconciliation look like if it happens at all in Afghanistan and the future of peace talks in Afghanistan. Pakistan has condemned yesterday's attack on the governor, the police chief, and what happened in Kandahar yesterday. We'll continue our discussion after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the security situation in Afghanistan after yesterday's deadly attack. General Lodhi, talking about Afghanistan, Pakistan is clear that Pakistan wants peace and stability in Afghanistan that is owned and led by the people of Afghanistan. Taliban wants legitimacy, and they have to some extent have gained that legitimacy because US is now having direct talks with the Taliban. Kabul government, as we were discussing earlier, is still not happy with the way US is carrying on the whole thing. What does US want?
That is a big question, and I don't think they are saying what they really want. They have said it in certain terms. For example, they said that our next competitors are China and Russia. So if China and Russia are the next competitors, the most ideal place to sit is Afghanistan because it covers Central Asia. It covers China, it covers Iran, Pakistan, route of Russia to the Indian Ocean. So they have said it, And it implies automatically that for them Afghanistan strategically is a very important place. And as the brother was saying, that even CENTCOM commander had said so. So I think if we look at these 5-6 objectives of US, I don't think they actually intend to leave Afghanistan. They would like to stay there in one form or the other, at least in a form strong enough to check all these things which I've just talked, about our nuclear assets, about nuclear developments of Iran, about China and CPEC and Russians coming in closer through Central Asia and then Afghanistan and then towards the Indian Ocean. So they have very vital interests as far as I see. So whatever they say, they won't be going very easily. But if it was a matter of choice, they would not go. Now the thing is that whatever they are spending, the political spending and the economic spending, whether they can bear that for a longer period or not. And political at home, what are the things developing. So I think if they leave, that will be under duress. And that pressure, at least I can discern, that pressure on their mind and on their military is showing. So they would, if they leave, then they would like to have a face saving. And the Pakistan's concern is, and as our people have said, very responsible appointments, that we would not like Americans to go without peace in Afghanistan. That means that they are actually saying that they should not leave the way they left earlier, the last time. They must negotiate. They have some semblance of peace, and then they should go. So I think from the heart, Pakistan also wants them to go, because Pakistan, some of us in Pakistan, including myself, we are clear that as long as Americans and foreign forces are there in Afghanistan, there can be no permanent peace there. And hence there can be no peace in Pakistan, because it is so interlinked. Right. So this is what I think.
This exactly is the point, because Mr. Akbar, do you think that Taliban would accept this, that the US might withdraw some forces, but they might keep some presence in Afghanistan? Would that be acceptable to the Taliban? And do you actually agree with this whole idea that US wants to stay on in Afghanistan? They want to stay in there.
I think, as General Saab pointed out, ideally, the Americans would like to stay, and ideally the Taliban would like the Americans to leave and have no foreign presence in Afghanistan.
At all?
At all. That would be the ideal positions. But the reality is that the Americans cannot stay in their present form, because they are facing a very active and a very live insurgency inside Afghanistan by the Taliban. And I think that the reality for the Taliban is that this is not 1994, 95, 96, where they can overrun Afghanistan. So they have to face a government and Afghan national security forces that has been trained and equipped by the Americans, that is supported by the Americans, and understand that the Americans have long-term interests in the region. So how do you negotiate between these two positions, I think, is key in the long run. Unless we see a complete crumbling of the Afghan national unity government, or warlords and supporters, tribal supporters of the Northern Alliance, etc., that support a Kabul government, that are invested in a Kabul government. I don't see that happening as long as America is putting in money. How long, as General Saab pointed out rightly, how long an American government can continue to push in cash into Afghanistan is also is a question mark. I think the Americans can do this for a very long time, because the alternative for the Americans is disastrous in a world where their unipolar power is already being challenged by a rising China, by a resurgent Russia. I think that withdrawal under difficult circumstances from Afghanistan would be quite a blow to American unipolar power globally. So I think if that is the case, the Americans will keep investing in Afghanistan. So I think the negotiation is somewhere in the middle. Otherwise, we will have to contend with the kind of crisis-prone Afghanistan that we're looking at right now for a very long time, which will have negative consequences for Pakistan.
Now, General Lodhi, what are the options for Pakistan now? Because Secretary Pompeo and Zalmay Khalilzad and the American officials have been visiting Pakistan frequently, and they have been asking Pakistan to do more. That same mantra continues. Pakistan has made Pakistan's stance very clear. what would be Pakistan's position, let's say, in Afghanistan, towards Afghanistan, and Pakistan's approach towards Afghanistan?
I mean, Pakistan, as far as peace in Afghanistan is concerned, I think Pakistan has reiterated a number of times that it cannot come through fighting. It has to be through talks. So Pakistan is supportive of the talks. But I think what you have said, I see a little bit of ambiguity and murky picture that what Americans really want. In my own analysis,
in Afghanistan, or what they
in
want from
Afghanistan, in the region,
Right, okay.
in the region, Afghanistan inclusive,
Right.
and for the very close reasons. The thing is that they keep on saying, they keep on talking to us about giving sanctuaries to terrorism and all that, but probably there is something else which they want, and it is for Pakistan to clarify the situation. I think a big power like America can live with a murky situation, but not a small power like Pakistan. It is in our interest to really find out that what do you want. And I think there is something related to China, there is something related to CPAC, and there is something which they are not saying. And we must ask them to say that.
And interestingly, 17 years on, we really want to know what US wants in Afghanistan. Thank you for joining us, General Lodhi. Pleasure having you on the show. Mr. Hassan Akbar, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and after the break, we'll continue our discussion on Pakistan's foreign policy and Pakistan's relations with UK. We'll take a break. Stay with us. Pakistan and welcome back. Welcome to the show. Pakistan and UK, United Kingdom, they have good relations. Both countries have been working together, and they have been cooperating in different areas. We today have a special guest in the studios, British journalists visiting Pakistan. They have been visiting Karachi, Lahore, and other places in Pakistan. We'll have a discussion with them on their trip to Pakistan and how do they see Pakistan-UK relations. Welcome to the show. We have Mr. Ken Sengupta. He is a senior journalist from The Independent. So welcome to the show. Our second guest is Mr. Jonathan Steele. He's the chief reporter of Middle East Eye. Welcome to the show. Right. Mr. Kim Sengupta, Pakistan visit. This is not your first visit, you were telling me. And how's your trip going so far? And you have been visiting Gwadar as well.
We have, Taimur. As I say, it's not my first trip, but it's been the first after a long while, with obvious changes, mainly for the better. And it's been very interesting. I mean, Gwadar, interesting in all kinds of respects. It's commercial, but also geopolitical. You know, the whole issue of the Chinese investment in this country and abroad, and then of course, you know, you've got the a new government, and then the Wagah border, you know, with India. It's all obviously, you know, very ceremonial and choreographed, but there are, as we know, still, you know, tensions after all these years. So it's been an interesting trip.
Right.
And I gather that, sorry, just finishing off,
Right.
that Mr. Imran Khan is going off to Saudi Arabia in the next few days, and interesting to see what he comes back with, if anything.
And we hope for the best, certainly, because this is going to be a big gathering in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of investors would be coming over there. And I think that is what Prime Minister's approach is, to invite those investors in Pakistan. And since you have been visiting Gwadar, to develop Gwadar and develop all those places that Pakistan thinks Pakistan should develop. Mr. Jonathan Steele, your visit to Pakistan, and how did you find Gwadar and Lahore and Karachi and all these places?
Well, Gwadar, which Mr. Sengupta already mentioned, it was particularly interesting. I think not many foreign journalists go there. It was a real pleasure to be able to see what was happening and to understand whether what we hear about Gowada is true or not. There's a lot of disinformation, I think, or misinformation, perhaps not disinformation, it may be just unconsciously getting things wrong. For example, that China is trying to put Pakistan into a debt trap by giving loans at very high interest rates, which will be unable to be paid off without ceding sovereignty over territory to China in return, sort of permanent leasing. Or that Chinese workers are going to come there, 500,000 has been talked about in some media reports. It'll turn into a kind of Chinese colony. Well, from what we understood from talking to people in that place, that's all nonsense. That it's a fairly normal investment, very big investment, of course, in size, but it's a normal investment on normal commercial terms with reasonable interest rates and good benefits for Pakistan as well as for China.
Yeah, that's right, and I think this is what is important. Rightly said, Mr. Steele, that Mr. Kim, this point that Pakistan has been fighting this war on terror. We have been fighting most notorious terrorist organizations in the region, rather, from Taliban to TTP, ISIS for that matter, and now Pakistan has embarked on a mega economic activity, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and you saw what Mr. Steele has been talking about. You saw Gowada and the projects that Pakistan is working with China. The impact of CPEC, the impact of development that Pakistan is working on the region, how do you see that?
Well, as you say, it's a troubled neighborhood. A lot of countries in this region have suffered terribly from terrorism. Pakistan, one of the worst victims of this, as you point out. And the two answers to violence, to sectarianism, one is education, and the other one is jobs. So the first one is vital, of course, but the second one is almost as important. And if Gowada does create the jobs, which would bring young Baluchis into life, the current life, then that is obviously a huge step in the right direction. So, the more people turn towards commerce and building things rather than destroying them, obviously is better, not just for Pakistan, but across the region.
And you see China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as a project that would bring the kind of change that Pakistan is looking for at the grassroots level, through education and through jobs?
Well, I mean, I don't think we should be too blasé about this. I've spoken to Pakistani observers on this trip, who caution against over-dependence on one country, and in this case China, and I think it's probably risky for any country to become over-reliant on just one commercial or political rival. But certainly, China, along with others, should be a huge boost to the economy.
And Mr. Steele, since UK is also involved in the NATO forces and in Afghanistan, UK has been fighting this war on terror. Pakistan and United Kingdom also have cordial relations, and they date back to say last 70 years, I would say. Do you think that the environment in Pakistan is conducive enough for the British companies and those large companies, and they can do business with Pakistan? Do you see it that?
Well, obviously the number of terrorist incidents in Pakistan has dramatically dropped in the last 5 or 10 years, and so that makes the environment for British businessmen to work here much safer, more relaxed, and more able to concentrate on the primary job, which is to develop business and commerce and not to just protect your own investments and your own personal safety. So that's a huge step forward. I mean, we have this thing called Brexit, which I'm sure you know about in Pakistan, because you have so many people of Pakistani origin in Britain who must be concerned about Brexit, just like any other British people. And there are people who are in favour of Brexit who hope that somehow there will be a huge boost in exports and imports from other parts of the world, not just from the European Union. But I personally doubt that. I think you have to fight for every pound of investment, whether you're in the EU or not, and I don't think it's suddenly going to become easier just because we're no longer in the EU. It might even become harder. So I think it's a very open question whether Brexit will change anything in the UK-Pakistan relationship.
So all the more reason, Mr. Sengupta, that both the people of UK and the people of Pakistan should cooperate more now and look for more businesses in Pakistan and back in UK.
You see, Taimur, you could have turned I could turn your first question around as to how would Pakistani businesses feel about investing in the UK with all the terrorist attacks we're having over there? We have 3 in London, but huge one in Manchester. So it's a fact of life and death that every country has to live with now. Unfortunately, terrorist attacks are in most countries. It's just a factor, a sad factor, which you've got to equate in investing. But that should not be any reason why UK companies should not invest in Pakistan. The other issues like infrastructure, but I don't think security is the leading factor. And I personally think that after Brexit, the UK will need new trading partners, and there is a feeling of among a lot of people who are advocating Brexit to re-establish old ties with with the old Commonwealth. So I suspect the trade will go up.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Mr. Sen Gupta, pleasure having you on the show. Mr. Steele, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. That's all from today's show. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz. There's rift among the governors over there. The Taliban are attacking. So there's a lot of chaos in Afghanistan. What does US want? The US is dictating the Taliban, the Kabul government, the Pakistani government. What does US want?
Well, this is, I think, the crucial question, whether they want to stay or whether they want to go. I think whether they stay or they go, I think one thing is very clear that they would want to convey some kind of a face saving, if they have to go, and they would not want Afghanistan turned more chaotic than what it is once they depart from Afghanistan. For that, in my view, I think now is the time really that they should be looking at the involvement of the United Nations in a big way, like getting UN peacekeeping operations, peace enforcers. I would say at least 50,000 at a time. They need to actually start working on this. Remember, when the Soviets had to leave Afghanistan, eventually it was the United Nations. It was through the Geneva Accords that they were able to pull back and they saved their face and all that. I think that may be the ultimate solution. And then we know that on the 20th of October there are these parliamentary elections. Pakistan can help in two ways. One is that with the assistance of the United States and the Afghan government, the border is sealed so that no terrorist activities can come from this side or from that side. And secondly, the Afghan refugees who are here, they could be actually given a chance to go and freely and fairly participate in those elections. That is the time, but probably in next year in March, when the presidential elections are being held. Then before that, if the Afghan refugees could return to Afghanistan and vote for their favorite candidate, probably that will have a very positive impact on the peace process in Afghanistan.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. General Raza Muhammad Khan, pleasure having you on the show. Mr. Rizvi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. The stance from Pakistan is very clear. First of all, that it is a failed strategy in Afghanistan. United States and NATO's a failed strategy in Afghanistan. And Pakistan would not fight anybody else's war on Pakistani soil. And the solution to the Afghan issue should be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led. Pakistan supports the Afghan-owned and Afghan-led solution to the issue in Afghanistan. Thank you for watching today's program. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.